Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Devon the Details, our AI podcast where we talk about what it takes to put AI and agents into production. My guest today is Ben Scharfstein, a good friend of mine, and Ben's had a really interesting history. He and I worked together early days as product managers at Google, and since then, he's started his own company, been the head of product for enterprise at Scale AI, where he worked closely with some of the most advanced teams in the world, helping them get models into production. And today, Ben is at Applied Compute, a new AI startup where he's focused on some of the hardest and least talked about production AI problems: compute, cost, latency, and a lot of the infrastructure that actually shape what's possible with agents at scale. I'm excited to have Ben on because he's seen a few different phases of the AI wave. He's seen what it looks like to be an AI startup in Silicon Valley, to work with some of the largest enterprises as they think about their production deployments, and is back in the arena in the startup landscape now. So Ben, welcome to the show. I'm excited for the conversation.
Thanks for having me, Dev. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So Ben, tell us a little bit about how you jumped into generative AI. I know that you were building your own startup in security, and then went into LLM pipelines. What motivated that move? And then what was your biggest learning doing a startup in the LLM space in 2022, 23?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think the journey starts when I was back at Google in 2018, 2019. I was working on recommendation systems. And so had a background in how do we productionize ML systems, had a couple of journeys in the startup world, first building a social video chat company that had nothing to do with AI. And then I was building a crypto security company to protect people from getting scammed. And my co-founder and I both had backgrounds in machine learning. And the goal was to really sit in the transaction flow and then use that information to build fraud systems using machine learning. So we always had this idea that we wanted to do something in ML. And 6 months after we started the company, it was going okay, but ChatGPT came out, and we both had this aha moment. And every day we kept on working on the security problem, which was important, but we weren't really seeing product market fit of Web3 generally. And we were using coding agents, the very beginnings of Cursor and ChatGPT. And 6 months after it came out, we dropped everything on the security side, and we said we need to be building in generative AI. This is the most important technology of our lifetime, and we don't really know what we're going to do, but we have an amazing team, small team of 5 people. Let's go build something.
Tell me about those early days, because I actually remember them well. When ChatGPT went out, it was, I think, November 2022 or so. And I remember going to literally my parents and like my friends, and I was trying to show them, like, this is amazing. Like, this isn't finding a web search result that's telling you how to cook pasta. It's like actually creating it live. And I was like, this is amazing. But I also had no real clue of like what were enterprises or like companies in B2B software actually going to need and use. And I remember at a certain point, we also decided to pivot our company from deep learning model infrastructure to just large language models. And it was really hard at the beginning because if you talked to customers and you asked them, are you interested in LLMs? 100% hit rate, yes.
Yeah.
And you ask them, like, what's a use case? And the most common use case in the first half of 2023 was, I don't know my use case.
Yeah.
So how did you pick like what problems you were even going to solve, like, as you started to build in that? Because I know a large part of that initial startup journey is like wandering the desert.
Yeah. I know it absolutely is. And I think, the result of the startup was that it didn't work out, and maybe we didn't pick the right problems. Although actually in the year that we worked on Gen AI problems in the startup, every single idea that we worked on, we probably worked on like 6 different ideas. Today would be a great company to go run. And I think that timing is everything, obviously in startups and companies, but also patience and conviction in the problems that you want to solve. Yeah. So we started out and we saw that these models were incredibly good at writing code. And so we started by building a data science agent, because we were having, this problem. We wanted to analyze data. We both came from very, like data-driven backgrounds. And we were just typing into ChatGPT, write me Python to go do this. We're like, well, probably the model can go run that Python. Right. And I think, Code Interpreter had just come out in ChatGPT. But what we saw was, if you want to use Code Interpreter, it doesn't have access to your production data. And it doesn't have access to your Snowflake. And so we were like, we should go and build something that natively integrates with enterprise. At the time, we had no enterprise experience. We didn't know what it was like to deploy inside of an enterprise. We were very naive. But we started to see the value that we could bring if we hooked it up to the data.
Yeah.
And then there's all of this implementation, beyond just like you build a really cool demo to, where does my data live? How do I, have RBAC and security and all these types of things that we were kind of ill-equipped as a 4-person startup that had never sold into enterprise to go and solve. But we
Yeah.
saw the spark of like what was possible. And we iterated through a bunch more ideas. We tried to stay as close to customers as possible, but it's difficult as a startup to go and like earn the trust,
If you were to
right?
go back in time, would you go after a different customer segment? Because if we look at something like coding agents, Cursor today feels like it's been used in every organization, right? Like every tech startup that has a billboard on 101 is probably using Cursor, but so are some of the world's largest enterprise organizations. But if we rewind to 2023, coding agents did not really have the trust of enterprises, and I almost feel like it required years before they would start to get there. And it was really a lot of the tech forward companies that were, beginning there. So maybe like I guess what I'm asking is, do you feel like it has to go through the paces where like all this technology gets validated with the startups and the mid-market tech and the digital natives, and then it can make the leap to enterprise? Or do you think that there would have been a way in 23 and 24 to actually make, if you had the benefit of all the hindsight possible, to actually make a startup that helped the automated data scientist or the automated software engineer, kind of like Devon, be successful, but for like a JP Morgan Chase
Yeah.
or like Nationwide?
I mean, I think that history is on the field, like the game being played by Cognition and building Devon and going to enterprises.
Right.
I think, you have to pick your go-to-market that is right for the time. And we
Right.
see this in every, technology cycle, right? You have Slack, which has product-led growth and now has, large enterprise, and the same with Cursor and the same with Cognition. I think Cognition's story is that they did always know that they wanted to go to enterprise, but they also launched Devon as a tool that anyone could onboard onto.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's like any technology adoption cycle. You have the people on the bleeding edge. I think Chris Dixon has this article that he wrote maybe like, I don't know, 2012 or something, that like every new technology starts out looking like a toy. And I think that's what you were talking about, the early days of like, I don't really know what people are going to use this for, but it seems interesting. And that's what
Yeah.
LLMs were. Like 2021, GPT-2 came out, even 2023 when ChatGPT, all these image models. And I think then once we all start using it in our day-to-day life, we use it outside of of our companies that we work at. You use it on the weekends for your side project. You use Cursor, and you're like, I have to have this. It's just so
Yeah.
transformational that you have to have it. But I think that the point is not, or at least my learning is not, that in 23 or 24 you shouldn't go after large enterprises or whatever. It's that you just need to have a lot of conviction and focus and make sure that you're building a product that people are using today with a vision towards how you're going to get the adoption that you want tomorrow.
And I actually want to come back to a couple of these points about like PLG versus sales led, and even what are the AI stack use personally. But let's go to, going from an AI startup that has to build that trust with the enterprise to now scale AI, which I feel like is, in 2017, I met a venture fund that was asking me to pitch what I thought were overhyped and underhyped areas in AI. And overhyped, I thought, were like all of these like simple no code model building tools. I was like, these don't feel like they actually are like that repeatable product market fit. Underhyped, I thought was like data infrastructure and data labeling. So
Yeah.
my pitch in 2017, 2018 was actually scale AI, because it felt like that was always the pain. Fast forward, a number of years, Scale AI feels like it became one of like the actual enterprise AI companies that was delivering revenue. And there's a lot of conversation about like, what's the gross margin mix on that, and also what's the competitive nature. But there's no denying that it actually had some of the most frequent and large enterprise AI adoptions, both pre-generative AI and also during. So as you were working as like the head of product for enterprise solutions at scale, what was the state of AI readiness for most of the enterprises you were talking to? Do you feel like they were on like the forward edge of the curve, or need a lot of hand holding? Where did the most
Yeah.
of them lie?
Well, I think first it's important to talk about what is the enterprise team at scale and what does scale do generally.
Mhm.
I'll just do that very quickly,
That's
which
perfect.
is that Scale's main product historically has been selling data labeling and kind of the hours of our the contributor experts. I still say "are," even though I left a few months ago. The hours of experts around the world to label data, and they sell that to the labs. So that's, the Googles and OpenAIs and Anthropics of the world. And they're selling that data to the most advanced foundation models to build the world's leading models. the enterprise team at scale has gone through many lives, but when I joined a little over a year ago, the goal of the enterprise team was to deploy into the Fortune 500, not to sell data, maybe to train models, but most importantly, to build agents that move the needle on business outcomes for the company. And it is very different than the work that scale does in the data business. In some ways, completely unrelated, in the sense that in the data business, it's how do we manage real people around the world, give them a marketplace to bring their expertise and label data to sell, to build models. And on enterprise, we took a very forward deployed motion and we said there's a big gap between the intelligence that we see in the models and enterprise AI readiness. And we think that we have the ability, both in our research expertise, the ability to hire amazing people that have gone trained models on the frontier. We see 9 months ahead of what the models are going to be capable of because we are creating that data and selling it to the labs. And also, we've built a platform that we think is going to allow us to scalably build up agents inside the enterprise. So that was kind of like the pitch of the Scale Enterprise team.
Yeah.
Totally unrelated not unrelated, in the sense that I described, from the data business.
Yeah.
But
it's net new, almost like business motion, go to market, and product value prop.
Yeah, exactly. And it's actually not just in the enterprise, it's also in the government. So selling to the US Department of Defense and US government, as well as international governments for non-military use cases around the world. And so there's kind of like 3 pillars of what Scale thinks of as their applications business. And post the Meta investment, that's actually now the main focus of the company at Scale. So when I joined, it was kind of like, hey, this is like an other bets side thing. And then post Meta deal, they're now running that the data business as a more scaled business, trying to run it profitably, and the growth really is coming from applications. And I think they've seen that, right? It's from when I joined to today has grown a ton. And actually, I think to answer your original question, at the beginning when I joined, it was people were transitioning into we've done POCs. Like when I joined, the pitch deck was, you can't get your POC into production, or we're going to do your POC. You can't actually get an agent into production.
Yeah. Wait, Ben, can I ask you actually?
Yeah.
I feel like that pitch was part of our pitch. I've heard that pitch in like every AI company that's selling an LLM platform or the other, which is like graduate from POC to production. And I think you're going to talk about like the value proposition. But before I get there, like, what, in your view, like just personal opinion, what was actually stopping a lot of these POCs from going into production? Like if you think about your conventional, bank, healthcare company, or CPG, like Global 2000 Enterprise, all of them have all these like POCs. What was actually stopping them from going into prod?
Yeah.
Like why did they?
Yeah, I think I'm interested to hear your take as well. I would say my take is, one, you have all of these like kind of governance and data issues, right? And so you build something hacking a POC to prove out the value prop, and then when you actually want to launch it, there's a lot of issues, deployment and all those types of things. That's one. I think the second is that in kind of early days, we were not really thinking about how do we build fully integrated product experiences, and more just like, here's a chatbot, it does something, but not really designing the product around an AI experience. And then I would say the last is like the models were not necessarily good enough at the time, and now they're amazing, right?
Completely agree.
Yeah.
I'm
interested to hear on your end what you see.
When we were building Predabase, like I think one of the big things that we actually had as an underlying thesis is like the models are really good for POCs, but not yet there for production. And the classic thing was like a 70% model is not going to get you to an enterprise grade 98% solution.
Yeah.
So our favorite quote was, generalized intelligence might be great, but I don't need my point of sale system to recite French poetry. So it was, the idea of let's get this model to do really well in a particular task.
Yeah.
I think that's actually changed now. Like, I think that, the models still have like a last mile gap to close, but that gap is a lot smaller than it was before. And I don't think it is the thing that is like blocking the POC from going into production. The thing that's like blocking the POC from going to production is not this model can't get the answer right, half the time. If it is, it's a really kind of obtuse use case for most organizations. Like those certainly exist, but they're not as common as what I feel like are like the top 3 issues. And they're all, I think, this was what was interesting to me, Ben, is like, I worked with a lot of like I like oftentimes talk about it as the companies that had the billboards on the 101, but
Yeah.
companies that were a little bit more AI native, and there was a lot of like, I know how this model is going to work. How do I optimize? Get that accuracy from 70 to 95, get the cost down, get the speed up. What I feel like I see in the enterprise though is it's really easy to build this POC, but it's the risk and governance posture around it that actually makes it really hard to go out into production. So you talked about data governance as one, and I think that's definitely part of it. It's like the concern around what if the AI says the wrong thing. But I think this extends to like how do I actually put guardrails in the inputs and outputs of models? Things people have been talking a lot about. And how do I even know what the models are going to be capable of doing? What do I do if the AI makes a mistake and something goes wrong? I think it's the lack of having a framework to address this that makes it such that this gets killed as someone's trying to graduate from the POC committee. I think that's like factor number one. At least, and by the way, that was at least my learning, which is maybe like it shouldn't have been surprising, but a little bit surprising. That's how we reoriented what we were doing inside of Rubric to be really focused on the governance security challenges. But I think that's factor number one. And then factor number two, which I think is really related, is I think people pick weird use cases, or not weird,
Yeah.
like they don't pick like the super high ROI use
Yeah.
cases because of this governance challenge, right? Like you've probably seen these MIT and McKinsey studies on like, is AI generating value for the enterprise? And those actually drive me nuts because I feel like I've seen enough instances of where AI drives value in an organization that I like, there's no doubt in my mind that the tech itself is capable of doing it. It's like organizationally, can you unlock the right use cases?
Yeah.
The challenge is like the high value use cases tend to be more sensitive. And people are like, well, we're not going to start there. So we'll start with an internal chatbot on like, just this one little scope of internal data for this like 2-person internal team. And I think that is like the second reason. It's like they don't generate enough value because they're not actually able to take enough risk. And then the third thing, which is a little bit orthogonal to my first 2 points to risk and governance, is I think POCs and AI are totally different than software POCs used to be.
Mm-hmm.
Software POCs and enterprise software licenses would be like 6-month things, 3-month things, and then it became fast to do a 30-day POC. You can build an agent in like a couple of days. So if you're telling me like 90% of AI POCs fail, but you can execute 30 POCs like inside of a month or a month and a half, that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world if you're actually able to get 1 or 2 out. I think the concern is more like, are you even able to get 1 or 2 of those out?
Yeah.
So that's kind of been like my lens in terms of what was blocking POC to
Yeah.
prod.
I think the other thing is that the model intelligence is there now, and what is missing is context. And this comes back to your point around data governance and risk, which is that you need to give the model access to the right context for it to be able to do the job. And at Applied Compute, we talk a lot about specific intelligence. Applied Compute, we build specific intelligence for enterprises that unlock the value of their company. And part of that is model weights, similar to what you're doing at Predabase. But part of that is how do you bring the right context to the model in the prompt? And this, we've seen the rise of prompt engineering and context engineering as, I would say, 2026 will be the year of context if it wasn't already, or the year of agents or whatever it is. And as we're moving more towards agent architectures, agents are developing their own context, building their own context, just like a human does. It works, it finds, it goes and does what it needs. You give it access to a very open set of tools. And that comes with a whole new set of challenges. As you want to do these long horizon tasks where it is not deterministic, you need to be comfortable by saying, you know what, it's going to go explore and figure it out. And I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but I trust it more than my alternative. And that's scary. And it should be something that takes a while to deploy. Like, it's not a bad thing that the POC needs to get proven out.
Right.
And then I'll say the other thing is that I think there needs to be a big mindset shift in how we think about, deterministic versus probabilistic software. And the probabilistic software, the AI software, is much more bespoke to the company, especially in the early days when we're figuring everything out and kind of the plane is being assembled as you're taking off. And that's not because, these are bad companies or whatever. It's just because like the field is so new, right? Like the reason why the forward deployed motion is so popular, it's something that we do at Applied Compute. We did it at scale towards the end of my startup. We were doing it. This is one of the big learnings of the startup, is there's so much value in forward deployed, is because there has just not been a maturation of the platforms. right? And so you need to forward deploy. You're 50% done with the product, but it can provide value today if you bring someone in on top, and then you come back and you bring that into your product.
Yeah.
And I think that is, if you don't forward deploy, I think it's very difficult to get your POC to production. But when you do forward deploy, I think you actually can do it.
Ben, define forward deployed a little bit, because I feel like forward deployed engineers have become, maybe one of the hot new job titles, AI titles in general. I feel like it's forward deployed engineers and go to market engineers. But
Yeah.
just give everyone like a quick definition for forward deployed.
Yeah. The way that I think of a forward deployed engineer is it's someone that is in your product and engineering organization that uses your product with your customer and builds on top of your product, and then also customizes and builds net new things that make it successful within the company, and then brings that back into the platform. So, the classic example of, obviously, of a forward deployed engineer is Palantir, and they work with their customers. They have their Foundry platform. They go inside of the company, they build an ontology. And when they need to do net new things, like maybe they have a new way that they want to visualize something, they will build it bespoke on top of Foundry, but also potentially write custom code. And then the second, third, fourth time they're doing that, they go back to the product team and they say, hey, we really need the ability to visualize, 3D racetracks, because we have, F1 and NASCAR and all of these customers. I don't know if you saw that. They did a very cool video with F1, like visualizing all this stuff. They probably don't have that in native on Foundry, but that is really, I think, what a forward deployed engineer. I think what a forward deployed engineer isn't, or shouldn't be, or you should be honest with yourself as a company if this is what it is consulting, right? Like, it is services in the sense that
that's almost surprising. I feel like when someone hears forward deployed engineer, the first thing they think about is like, I'm basically doing a lot of services work and consulting.
Yeah.
So
look, it can be billed as services revenue.
Yeah.
But I think you're making a mistake as your company if your mental model is we're just getting consulting revenue. Like, it needs to be forward deployed on top of a product that you own and are improving on if you want to have like any long-term sustainability. And I think most companies are doing this. I mean, Decagon and Sierra, they all have agent PMs and forward deployed engineers, and they're basically customizing their platform to their customers.
What's the trick to make something customizing the platform versus building a one-off customization? Right? Like, I can imagine I get into Morgan Stanley and they're like, here's the list of 100 different things I need. And it's about MS's like internal infrastructure and architecture. So how do you not become a consultant as a forward deployed engineer?
Yeah. Well, I think that, you always need to build custom things if you want to ship into enterprises. And if you look at every large enterprise company, even pre-LLMs, pre-AI, they have services arms that go and customize, and or they have this that is an ecosystem that's come up around their company. So, Salesforce, you have Salesforce implementation consultants that customize your Salesforce instance, but they're using the Salesforce platform, and they may need to build totally bespoke and custom software, because in the end of the day, a company's, promise to their customers is we are going to help you move your business forward. It is not, we're going to sell you software and like, we don't care if it works, right? It has to work. And I think, it's like, if you want your software to work and it doesn't work out of the box, you got to go figure out how to make it work, because you probably know how to use it the best. And if it's, Morgan Stanley is completely bespoke stuff, but it's like, okay, but in doing that, we will allow them to use the platform. That's totally fine. That's good. Whatever. If you said, you know what, you're not going to use our platform. We're just going to build you a custom agent that we just, raw engineer in LangChain, and you deploy it on your infrastructure. And like, all you're getting is our intelligence, but we have nothing enduring afterwards. You're not a forward deployed engineer. Then you're an AI consultant, and there's lots of great companies that are AI consulting companies as well. They're just not forward deployed engineers.
No, I really like that background. And I think, I was going to ask you actually, what were some of the biggest learnings from the time at Scale AI doing the enterprise deployments? I feel like these forward deployed models has to be one. But let me actually say, one of the things that I love about this kind of newer state you joined Scale at in terms of the business building agent applications is I feel like anytime you're incubating something new, you get punched in the face a few times, and there's always some surprises. What was like the most surprising thing for you as Scale was figuring out how to deploy agents for applications into production for enterprises? What were the things maybe you didn't expect ahead of time and were surprising?
Yeah, I think this probably shouldn't have been surprising given...
it's never surprising in hindsight.
Yeah, it's never surprising in hindsight. But I think the most surprising thing to me was, in some ways, how slow it is to deploy inside of large companies for
Mm,
reasons that are unrelated to technology.
mm,
And just as much or more people problems and organizational problems and all of those types of things are the reasons that you uh, sometimes don't move from POC to production or whatever,
mm,
or takes a long time to deploy. And then there's also a lot of very good reasons why things take a long time. If you're deploying your platform into a bank and that bank is serving billions of dollars in transaction volume, you really want to make sure that you go through all the security reviews, and they want to make sure, you want to make sure, and that's a good thing. Um, but I think that the speed that startups move at, which I was working in for 5 years, and then at scale and out applied compute, is just very different than the speed that even incredible large companies work at. And reminiscing back at my time at Google, I remember back to how slow we shipped amazing things, but we shipped them very slowly. And I think Google has changed probably a lot since you and I were there.
yeah.
But that was a shock to the system after 5 years of working in startups, where your sprints are measured in days, not weeks,
Yeah.
or not months. And
Or months. Yeah.
at these large companies, it's the minimum time that we ever deployed the Scale Gen AI platform, which was the platform that we built our agents on, was 6 weeks
Mm,
minimum. And oftentimes it would take 3 to 6 months.
yeah.
And, that's because we were deploying kind of like, on the high side, inside of their VPC, go through all of their security and all of these reviews. And
Yeah.
if you want to work with Fortune 50 companies, you need to do that.
Yeah, and we're talking about like the infosec and security reviews, which is almost like a bread and butter parcel of getting software deployed inside of an enterprise. But you're now doing something scarier for all of these companies. You're bringing in like agents and models. And so,
Yeah.
how did Scale or you get these enterprise customers comfortable with the custom agents you were building? We were just talking about how one of the things that makes it hard to go from POC to production is, well, what could the agent do? What do I do if something goes wrong? How do I know it's not going to leak information? I imagine some of these things came up when you were at Scale. Like, how did you end up getting customers ultimately comfortable with the risk that AI or these agents might have posed?
Yeah. I think that we actually have moved beyond the I'm scared about AI. And we're a little bit in the next phase. So I think the end of the, story about Scale is that in the first 3 to 6 months I was there, it was go from POC to production. And in the last 6 months, it was, hey, actually, we're in production. How do we make it better? How do we make it more impactful?
Hmm.
And I think that most companies are recognizing the existential threat that they have from AI and the opportunity that they have from AI. And they know that they need to be expanding their use of AI. And so I saw this become easier over time at
Hmm.
scale. The beginning, all of these questions. And at the end, especially when you have a great executive champion who sees they're using Claude or they're using Gemini in their own life and they see what the value can be, they push it through. They just hammer it through. And that's really the best way. I mean, one of the things I learned about enterprise sales, it's like you read all of these, you hear these podcasts and books and these things. You need to have a champion and a buyer and all of these types of things. And it's very, really, very true. But
Yeah.
the most important thing is like get the executive, get their cell phone number, text them, and they will unblock things. And that's, I think, the biggest thing that leaders can do inside of an organization is unblock their team. We were talking with someone from a very, very, very large retailer. And we were talking with the executive team. And they told us that they launched a chatbot and they tried to ask it, it was a chatbot about a retail experience. And they tried to ask it, what's the status of my return? And the chatbot refused to answer
Hmm.
because they were so worried about data and governance that it was not allowed to have access to your return status. And it was a retail chatbot that was supposed to be for customer service and support. And what had happened, they did a postmortem, the VP, SVP, CEO, they were like, what happened? They were like, there were 10 legal reviews and we decided that it wasn't allowed to have access to this data. And so the the CEO top down said, unblock everything. Don't worry about legal. We obviously need to be above the law. We want to take a lot of risk and we're going to go do this. Like
Yeah.
if you ever run into any risk, any product team comes into any risk, come to me, I'll unblock you. And I
Yeah.
think, and now they have, real useful AI agents in production serving their customers. And that was because the leadership team said, we're going to take this risk. These companies have been built up to avoid risk. But if you don't take some risk, you will be left behind. And
Yeah.
the risk is going down as the model gets better and as, great companies come in and help you absolve you of that risk.
Yeah, no, I love that example because it's so classic for what I see, which is something bad might happen. So we're just going to shut down access at the broadest possible level. And part of it's like we don't actually have the technology in place, right? To be able to say something like, hey, I want to give my agent the ability to email, but only internal users, not external users. So we just say no email access.
Yeah.
How did that company got comfortable with the risk because the CEO was like, I'm going to go ahead and do that. But I feel like there's usually times where they're like, and we're going to mitigate the risk by doing A, B, C. Like, did you see that in that org? Like, was there a plan on like how to bring that risk down over time, or was it sort of like, let's hope the models get better and like we'll continue to do these reviews from
Yeah,
now
I think it is all about creating a really good harness of like what is the model, what's possible for the model to do. And
on?
so you want to create kind of strong guarantees of like this model cannot write to our production database. So maybe we create a replica of the database, right? Or this model cannot access other people's data. You just need to like make sure your API route makes that impossible.
Yeah.
And then let the model cook, right? Once it has access to what it should have access to. Obviously, it's not always going to work, but I think consumers also have more forgiveness over at least some of the failure modes.
Yeah.
You know, at scale, we did a lot of red teaming. And
Mhm.
so this is basically, we had a team that were experts at prompt engineering and trying to hack the models to do bad things.
Mm.
But there's a few classes of kind of problems you care about. And I think we used to care, the public, Twitter or whatever, used to care about the class of problems, which is trying to trick the model into saying something bad, right?
Mhm.
So, you can get the model maybe to say racist things or things that we wouldn't think are nice to say. But now people know it's like, yeah, okay, well, you like prompted it with this very tricky thing that made it say that thing. It's not out of the box saying those things, and we're okay with that. Whereas 5 years ago, there were all of these controversies where they
Right.
were like saying that, and it was a big deal. But I think the Overton window has moved, and it's okay now. Obviously, your customers' security over their data is something that is sacrosanct, and like no company can ever give that up. And so you just need to have good normal engineering, good context engineering, good tool use, good harness, good environments that make it impossible. And then within that, allow the model to do its thing.
Yeah, I love that anecdote from the company that's deploying this in the retail space because I feel like it's so familiar. Even the part where it kind of gets unblocked because of a CXO somewhere saying, all of the things that we're talking about here are different appetites towards risk, and there's a risk towards not innovating. So we're going to go ahead and take some amount of this risk. And then the question I feel like for a lot of I actually feel like a question for the AI infrastructure players now is like, how do we make that CXO look smart and
Yeah.
provide them like a way to be able to manage the risk? Because one thing we don't have today in a lot of markets is like a really good way to be able to have like, most people don't have like an undo button for the AI agents, and that's like uncomfortable. Most people don't have a way to actually make it easy to be able to do like real time guardrails and governance.
Yeah.
Like there's so many organizations I've worked with where like we have a policy written that says AI should not do this. There's no way to implement that in the software. And I
Yeah.
feel like that actually would be the thing that helps, the CXOs and these enterprises start to get the adoption a lot more quickly.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that one of the other things we did at scale, and we also do at Applied Compute, is build these guardrail models. And
Yeah.
so you can, and I'm sure you have experience doing this as well, because you can basically distill down, much larger models into very small models that are super low latency, very cheap to serve on every single query, and you
Yeah.
can basically exploit the generator verifier gap to, have very classically dumb model, but that's good at this task of making sure that it didn't say something it wasn't supposed to, verify a very large model. And you can do that very cheaply, especially,
Exactly.
yeah, with LoRa's and,
Exactly. And that's what
yeah.
we have been really oriented on is taking some of our infrastructure that was around easily creating fine-tuned small versions of models and serving them efficiently at scale so that you can start to use AI to be able to enforce things that would be impossible to do with a rule system. Like I can't figure out how to write a rule for something like your AI agent should not give financial advice, but a model can probably go ahead and look at something that says sell 50 calls of NVIDIA and be like, yeah, this is financial
Yeah,
advice.
yeah. I think that's like probably one of the most powerful things to realize is, just saying like generate the thing and then saying, did you generate something that broke my policy?
Yes.
Right. it will
Yeah,
give you different responses. Like, don't do this, and then did you do this? And it was like, oh, yeah, sorry, I did that. But it's
exactly.
it's natural to think about like that's how humans work as well, right? We make mistakes, and then you ask them, did you make a mistake? And they're like, oh yeah, I checked my work.
And I'm really keen actually to hear about the new startup that you've just joined, Applied Compute. So you were working in scale at these production and enterprise deployments, and then there was a much smaller company, Applied Compute, I believe a San Francisco-based startup that looks like it's doing extremely well. I'm curious to hear a little bit about just what motivated that decision. How did you pick Applied Compute? There's so many of these AI companies that feel like they're doing really interesting work, growing very, very quickly. How did you find yourself here?
Yeah, I left Scale after the Meta investment, um,
People are going to
and
be bummed we're not talking about that more, but we'll
yeah,
come.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, come.
And Scale is still great. Love all my former coworkers there, but for me, it felt like it was the right time to go. I always knew that I wanted to start another company, or thought I wanted to start another company, um, and it seemed like the right opportunity to do that. And so I left in August and was exploring starting something. And what I really was obsessed with at Scale, and was obsessed with as I was exploring, and still obsessed with, is how do you capture the enterprise context, the latent knowledge inside of an enterprise, and
Mm,
make it useful for agents. Because this is what I saw as the biggest barrier to adoption: is you have these very, very, very smart models, super intelligent, and yet they don't know anything about your business. And the reason they don't know about your business is because that information is inside people's heads. It's not written down.
mm,
And so RAG doesn't help you learn the intuition that the person that's been, underwriting the insurance policy for 30 years has, because the information is not what was the policy of last week. It is, what is the thing that made you underwrite that policy and not the other one?
mm,
And how do we learn that? Through embodied work, through talking to people, through using test time compute or sleep time compute in order to distill information. And so I was working on this problem, and my whole idea was basically, can I interview people, build a co-pilot that basically takes conversations and written, Slack and email and all these types of things, and turns it into AI ready data on the kind of latent data.
mm,
And I'd met the Applied Compute team. They were probably a month or two in when I met them. They started like May, June. I maybe met them in July. And I thought to myself, I was still at Scale, and I thought to myself, these guys are going to be good competitors one day, because we want to do very similar things. But it felt like, sometimes you talk to someone and every conversation is just yes and you're like, are you reading my blog, my personal diary? Like, are you reading my mind? Like, what's going on? This is like a very special conversation. And that's what I felt when I first met Yash, Rhythm, Linden, Michael, my friend from Scale who leads go-to-market Applied Compute, had just joined. And I was like, these guys are young. They're really young. They combination of dropped out of school, had worked at OpenAI, had been research leads at OpenAI despite being 22, 24 years old. I was like, all right, going to be good competitors. And then I was working on this thing a few months later, and I got reconnected with someone at Applied Compute. I was trying to take him away as my co-founder. He was not interested at all, and I was like, "This guy's amazing." And I texted Yash, the CEO of AC, and I said, "Let's go for a walk." And I remember going home, chatting with my wife, and I was like, "I think I need to join Applied Compute. Like, they're just doing such interesting things and such a mind meld of kind of the vision that we see between me and Yash and the rest of the company." And they have an expertise that I don't have, which is the ability to post-train models out on the frontier, right? So Yash was the
mm.
research lead for Codex. Rhythm and Linden were also kind of building the O1 class of models and deploying infrastructure for GPT-5. And I was like, that is an experience that I don't have. I really want to join forces with what I think are really generational founders, and hopefully be a part of what can be a great company. And in the past 8 months, we've come a very long way. We're working with, some of the biggest companies in the world, both kind of AI native and digitally native companies, and helping them build specific intelligence for their companies. And I think, in some ways, very similar to what you were doing at Predabase, like building, general models are not going to solve your specific problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an area of the market that I feel like will continue to need really good solutions. And I think that it's useful to bring some of that forward deployed culture that you also had from the previous two companies, and thinking about how you're going to work with some of these larger enterprises here as well.
Yeah.
I want to end with just a couple of questions, maybe outside of like the context of the work that you've done. And I think, one of the first questions I'm just curious about is, personally, I feel like one thing that I've always loved about you is you're very good at like keeping up with some of the latest tools, like both I'd say in like research and also in practice. And to me, I think one of the things that stood out is like AI has to become more and more part of your personal stack because it's really good at work productivity. It's also good at personal productivity. What's your AI personal stack? Like, what are the tools that you like using? Maybe like you could say like one or two at work, but especially like outside of work, what have you really enjoyed trying out?
Yeah. Well, so I like to talk, maybe as you can tell. And so I really love transcribing things. And so part of my stack has just been transcribing a lot of things and then throwing it into I switch between, Claude Opus, Gemini 3, and
I
GPT
think
5.
everyone does these days. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just like, I don't care about, token spend, give me the best, whether it's at work or personal. And I'll just like go for walks and just talk to myself and have it write down my thoughts and stuff. I will even sometimes at work have a little mic so I can just whisper into it. I have this right here. And then, using that and then just kind of building up this like context, because one of the things that I find frustrating is like having to repeat myself, so I want to give it access to my Notion, to my Google Docs, to my, to my email, whatever. And so I've been kind of hacking together different solutions to be able to do that so that it can search over it, and you just give, a Claude Code agent the ability to look over the file system and, read things and go search around. So that's been like at work, very fun is, I think there's tremendous value in writing,
Yeah.
and you can't have AI do the thinking for you. But also it's very time consuming to transform, something that you've written into another form that needs to be presented. So maybe you've written a very long doc and it needs to be a short doc because you want to send it as a Slack, and I'll just like AI summarize, go send. Or you've done the transcription. Can you just turn this into bullet point notes, and then I'll go write the doc. So those are things. And then I would say in my personal life, I think, these chatbots are just really everything apps. And one of the most fun experiences that I have with AI that I had maybe a year and a half ago was I was walking around Paris with my wife, and we did a walking tour just with a classical app, like, audio app around some neighborhood. And then we went to another neighborhood and they didn't have a walking tour of that neighborhood. And so we just pulled out my AirPods, put one in each of our ears, and we just said, give us a walking tour of this area. This is where we are. And then we wanted to hear about very niche things about that area, follow-up questions about the artist and how that related to other cities that we'd been at and stuff like that. And that was, to me, just like a very magical experience of, you don't need to build an AI travel app. It's just like ChatGPT voice mode does it. And I found that for almost everything that I do, I'm just like, I don't need a specific app for this. I'm just going to use ChatGPT or Gemini. And so in the gym, I don't use a workout app anymore. I just open up ChatGPT. I said, I want to, squat today, give me the rest of the thing. And I'll say, remember this. What did I do last time? All that type of stuff. When I'm cooking, I love to cook. You open up ChatGPT and I say, this is what I have in my fridge. This is maybe a recipe that I like, but I don't have these ingredients. Make a modification for me. And then I'll talk to it, and then like, to me, that's just such a magical experience, and one that, like 2 years ago didn't exist. And now I couldn't imagine living without it.
There's like a follow-up conversation that's needed when it's, you no longer need specific products for something, but these models are quite good at getting you like basically something morphed into that. What that's going to mean for consumer software is like a whole nother episode. But since this is like an AI podcast, I feel like we have to end with like one prediction, Sal. And what I'm always really curious about is, my favorite question that I think I've been asked is I got asked like, give me something that's underhyped in machine learning back in 2017. And
Yeah.
at the time, I remember I was like, everything's overhyped. Like ML and AI is so big. And that was 2017. But I'm curious, actually, like if you're thinking now, in 2026, Jan 2026, what do you think is something that is underhyped today in AI? Or, something that you think is true that maybe a lot of other folks haven't yet realized or think is true in AI?
Yeah. I think the most underhyped thing is consumer AI experiences. Now, obviously, we have the ChatGPT, like the mega apps, but I think that like there's going to be a new social network built on the backs of AI. There's going to be a lot of new consumer experiences, and I think outside of ChatGPT and the big apps, we haven't really seen things that are at scale consumer apps. But I think we will. And I think most founders right now are like forward deployed, let's go, just get 100 million of revenue in our first year and we can do it and go to the enterprise, which is amazing. But it's like, 22-year-old kids before were not building enterprise software. They were like, let's go build some social app. And I think that the technology is there, the creativity is there, and one of my core beliefs is that the catalyst for new social networks is always lowering the barrier to creating content. And AI does that. It really lowers the barrier to creating content in a new and interesting way. And I think we're going to see in the next 2-3 years a new social network emerge in the backs of AI. That's my hot take.
Amazing. No, I love it. And I think it's funny that we've almost swung the pendulum back away from, I think, the social, local, mobile,
exactly,
was like a thing, now back into enterprise, and I'm sure the pendulum's going to go the other way. So I think you're
okay. So Dev, to throw it back at you, in the year 2026, what do you think is the underhyped and overhyped, or maybe just the underhyped thing in AI?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really should think of answers to these questions before I ask them. But if I thought about like what's underhyped in 2026, I think like it really comes back. It comes back to the observation that a lot of people are building these POCs or pilots on dummy data or on very, very safe systems. So I love that example you gave where the retailer basically was like, nope, no access to the to the internal like database on returns, because I think that that's pretty much the real like experience with a lot of organizations. So what I think is actually going to be underhyped is like probably the least sexy thing I can think of right now, but it's like I think that what you all do with fine-tuned, distilled like small models protecting larger models is something not that many people outside of like the evals community or the guardrails community talk about. Like if you thought about like small models governing larger models, I don't think very many people actually talk about that as like a commonplace thing, right? People are talking about like MCP, A to A. People are talking about all these like big shifts and like how coding agents are a great thing. But to me, the thing that people don't talk enough about is how we need models to start to govern like AI models. And the reason I think it's underhyped is I don't think we're going to actually start to see a lot of enterprise adoption until we get a good solution to these problems. And when I sit on like AI governance committee meetings, I'm like, how are you supposed to solve this question of like, this AI could go off and say anything? It's impossible to be able to write any rule system, any policy engine that can go ahead and do this without relying on AI. So I think AI governing AI is this the space that I'm sure like it's not maybe I don't know how controversial it is or not, but it's something we probably need to talk about much more than we have so far, because to me it's like the number one thing stopping a lot of organizations from being able to get out to that place so that AI chatbot can actually process returns. Or we see all these amazing demos of like, hey, this agent's going to do like 90% of the work of an employee. There's no way it can if it doesn't have 10% of the access to the employee. And I think in order to be able to get that access, you're going to need small models to be able to actually control as a layer on top of these larger models, as you said. So yeah, that's probably like my direction. But
leaking alpha and clip it, go viral, and now everyone would be talking about it.
Exactly. Well, Ben, thank you so much for joining me here today. It's a fantastic conversation. I love diving into every part of building a generative AI startup, all the way through like the enterprise experience that you have at Scale AI. Now bringing some of those experiences both into personal life, also at applied compute. So this is a great conversation. Would love to have you back on at some point. And for everybody else, thank you so much for joining another episode of Devon the Details, and excited to continue the conversation on all things AI and agents.
Thanks, Dev.